Habit is a kind of quiet programming. We like to think we wake up each morning and decide to live our lives. But most of what we do is already written, tiny rituals stacked on muscle memory. On the morning of November 15th, 2004, in Delmar, New York, a man named Peter Porco got out of bed, walked to his bathroom, brushed his teeth, went downstairs, made his lunch, and stepped outside to collect the newspaper. He did all of that after 16 blows to the head from a Hudson Bay axe. His brain was devastated. His routine kept going. Neighbors would later recall seeing him in the doorway, moving slowly but moving, before he finally collapsed in a pool of blood. Sometime during the night, Peter had been struck in the head with this axe. His skull shattered, his jaw destroyed. Large portions of his brain physically destroyed. By any ordinary standard, this should have been the end. But something else kept running. Habits, wired by decades of routine, the practiced logic of a disciplined law clerk, kept firing. His body moved through its morning checklist while his conscious mind was already slipping away. In neurology, this is called automatic behavior, complex, guided actions carried out by a brain that is no longer fully there. In this case, that silent automaton routine, played out in blood, would become the opening puzzle in the story of his son, Christopher Porco, the Golden Son. On paper, Christopher Porco was the kind of son parents brag about. 21 years old, tall, athletic, charismatic, a student at the University of Rochester, the kind of kid who drove a bright yellow Jeep and never seemed to carry any real weight on his shoulders. That Jeep became part of his identity, a bright, moving symbol of success and independence. In reality, a flawless image is rarely honest. Christopher's polished image hid a very different story underneath. By 2003, his academic life had quietly fallen apart. His GPA wasn't just low, it was catastrophic, hovering around a 1.0. He was forced to leave the university. He didn't go home and confess. He didn't ask for help. Instead, he chose to reread reality. He forged transcripts and lied about his enrollment status. He misled his parents into believing he was still on track, still living the rational, carefully planned life they had invested in. The Golden Son image had become more than a story. It was a structure he was determined to hold up, no matter how many cracks formed underneath. Beneath the academic fabrication, another pressure was quietly building: money. For Christopher, the cost of his Golden Son image had a specific price tag: $31,000. Debt accumulated to fund his life at Rochester and his yellow Jeep. To a mind that refuses to accept failure, deception can start to feel like logic. Christopher forged his father's signature on a loan application. It wasn't a one-time slip. It was a deliberate choice. A calculated attempt to buy more time and keep the illusion intact. But his father, Peter, wasn't just any parent. He was a seasoned law clerk, trained to spot inconsistencies. Eventually, the red flags surfaced. Loan notices he didn't remember approving, financial obligations he had never agreed to. He wrote to Christopher, not with anger, but with the cold weight of the facts. "You forged my name. You lied about school. You can't manufacture a life on paper forever. When you lie for long enough, the truth can feel like death." For Christopher, those messages weren't just criticism. Each one stripped away a little more of the version of himself he'd been selling to his family, his friends, even to himself. Rather than let that version collapse, he began looking for a way to remove the people exposing it. Christopher believed in the logic of distance. Rochester to Delmar, about 230 miles. a 7-hour round trip between his dorm and his parents' home. On the night of November 14th, he put that plan in motion. He left Rochester and drove through the night. He had hours in the dark to think about what he was going to do and what he believed it would solve. At some point on that road, the axe in his parents' home started to become a solution. When he reached the house in Delmar, he used knowledge only a family member would have. He disabled the home alarm, cut the phone lines, and moved through the house like someone who belonged there, acting like an architect, removing each obstacle to his perfect image. When police responded to the Porco home, they walked into a house soaked in blood. Peter lay dead near the front door. Upstairs, they found his wife, Joan. She had been attacked with the same axe, sustaining massive head and facial injuries. Bones shattered, tissue destroyed, the kind of damage that should have made survival impossible. Even so, she was still alive. She was taken to Albany Medical Center and placed in intensive care. She couldn't speak, but she could open her eyes. She could respond. Detective Christopher Bowdish understood that whatever she could still communicate might be the only direct evidence from inside that house. At the hospital, he reduced everything to yes or no. Do you know who did this to you? A slight nod. Did a family member do this? Another nod. Was it Jonathan? Christopher's older brother. A clear no. Was it Christopher? According to police reports and later testimony, she gave an affirmative nod. In that hospital room at Albany Medical Center, the golden sun shifted from promising college student to primary suspect. If this story were only about cold logic, this is where it would end. A son buried in lies and debt, an insurance motive, a surviving mother pointing to him as her attacker. But real cases are rarely that clean. Once Joan's condition improved, she said she had no memory of identifying Christopher in the hospital. She rejected the idea that he was responsible. She became his most visible defender. She sat in court day after day, directly behind him, watching the crime scene photos, hearing the forensic testimony, looking at the son accused of destroying her face and killing her husband, still choosing over and over to side with him. A mother's loyalty doesn't always follow evidence. It follows blood, memory, and hope. Protecting her son became its own kind of irrational logic, one that no prosecutor could fully dismantle. In court, the alibi of those 230 miles collapsed under the weight of data. Traffic cameras in Rochester captured a yellow Jeep Wrangler heading toward the thruway around 10:36 p.m. on November 14th and returning toward campus around 8:30 a.m. the next morning. A toll ticket taken at exit 46 in Rochester at 10:45 p.m. and turned in at exit 24 in Albany at 1:51 a.m. carried mitochondrial DNA that matched Christopher's profile and only a tiny fraction of North Americans. 23 minutes later, at 2:14 a.m., the alarm at the Porco home was shut off with a master code known only to the victims, their 2 sons, and 2 relatives who were not in the area. Around 3:45 to 4 a.m., a neighbor reported seeing a yellow Jeep in the driveway. On campus, 7 students testified they never saw Christopher in the dorm lounge that night, despite his claim that he slept there. He was first seen running toward his dorm around 8:45 a.m. on November 15th. By the time this was laid out, distance was no longer an alibi. It was a map of his movements. In 2006, Christopher Porco was convicted of murdering his father and attempting to murder his mother, and sentenced to 50 years to life in prison. The case was closed on paper, but the pattern behind it isn't. We live in a world where your worth is measured by your image, not your reality. Under that kind of pressure, some people hide, others break, and a few, like Christopher, try to edit the world around them instead of editing themselves. If your whole life feels like a performance you're about to drop, and you're hiding debt, grades, addiction, or anything else because you're convinced the truth will destroy everything, it won't. There is always another option before that. talk to someone, a friend, a family member, a therapist, or a hotline. The truth is heavy, but it is not the end. This is Rational Ends. Let me know your thoughts in the comments and please subscribe.